Hi there once again, and welcome to another Expresso Mechanic tutorial. And in this one we're going to be producing a letter sequencer. And this particular project is 100% Python, and we're going to be using the Python tag in order to achieve the desired result. And as you can see, we've got the letters appearing in different ways, and what we're doing here is producing this using sequences. The radio buttons here are animated, as you can see. They change and it chooses one of these sequences, and that's how we're bringing the letters on. So we have a number of different ways that we can do that, and we could add more sequences if we choose to, or we can simply rearrange the order of the numbers within the existing sequences. So we have absolute control over the way the letters appear. So that gives you the basic idea. That's what we're going to be about in this tutorial. So without further ado, let's see if we can make this happen. We'll start by bringing in a text line, and the font I'm going to use will be copper plate. So we can see that up here, got lots of fonts, copper plate, that one. Okay, fantastic, and we'll just type Expresso Mechanic in there for what it is. You can use any words, but you've got to make sure you know how many letters there are in each word so that you get the correct number of index values. So it doesn't have to be exactly the same as mine, but if you can use Expresso Mechanic, you'll be able to follow on perhaps a bit more easily. Okay, the height will make 60, just so that it's a little bit more manageable, and we can see things much more easily. And then all we've got to do is check separate letters, because we will be wanting to make this editable. Hit C, and we've got a list of our splines here, each representing a letter from Expresso Mechanic. Fantastic. We'll just rename this text. And then we can select all of these, hold down the Option key, and drop them into extrudes. We'll make the offset 10, and that's as much as we need to do. I'm not going to bother with caps. You can if you wish to, but I'm not going to bother. For what this is, it'll work fine. Okay, we'll just close these up. And we've got all of our extrudes essentially with index values from 0 through to 15. Great, we're on the right road. We'll just change the display to Garage Shading Lines and Isopalms, and that will give us a result that's pleasant on the eye. Fantastic. So we've got our letters all set up, and we're ready to move on to the next step, which is to create a null, add a Python tag. So programming tags, Python. And we can then switch to a scripting layout, open our Python tag, and we're ready to start work on our code. The first thing to do is remove all of these comments and the word pass, get rid of that. We don't need to import anything, we're not using random or anything like that, so we can start within our main function down here. And we'll move on from here. So we can say global numString is the first global variable, and as per usual you will find out what these mean as time progresses. Counter, and finally splines for the moment. The next line to add will be the ubiquitous frame variable. So frame is equal to doc.get time, open close, .get frame, open, doc.get fps, open, double close. And as I always say, for anyone who doesn't know, this just simply gets the current frame from the timeline. Okay, let's move on. Now, our next variable, we actually need to create some user data before we can bring this one in. So that's going to be our next task. Now, the user data needs to be created on the tag. So we'll select the tag and then add user data. First thing to do is add a group, pull the group so that it's level with the user data here so we don't see this. Drop the data in there and call this 1. We will add 2, 3, 4 and 5 a bit later. It will be a string, and we may as well put the default values in: 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 and 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 and finally 15, and hit OK. And now we've got our group here. We can rename that actually. So let's go into our user data, just rename the group. We'll call that controls. OK, fantastic. Hit OK. And now we've got controls here. So we've got one in there. We won't put the radio buttons in just yet. We'll do that a bit later. We will come back here. But for our purposes now, we've got one in there. So we can say 1 is equal to, and then all we need to do is drag this and drop it here. And as per usual, it puts it in the wrong place. So Command X and then paste it back in there with Command V. And then we can simply say op in front of our bracket there. So we've got that in. Let's just space that 1 space in. It should be 4 spaces after the def so that everything is equal. Great, so we've got our sequence in. Let's just print this to make sure that we're getting what we want. So if we print 1, we can see that we've got that string in there. We'll leave the print there for now because we'll use it again. We can now say text is equal to, and it will be dot search object brackets open single quotes text. So we're looking for this null. Let's just make sure that we've brought that in. So just type text in there. Let's have a look, see what we've got. Oh, sorry, not text with a capital T. I want text with a lowercase t. So let's just do that. And we've brought this object in. We can say text null, which is exactly what this is, with the ID 540, etc. That's the 5140. Great, so that's brought that in. The next thing we need to do is get each of these extrudes. So we can say letters is equal to, and it will be text dot get children open close, and we'll print letters. And straight away we get a list containing all of our letters. Okay, so they're all in there. And it gives you their names here. We can see extrude.15 is there. So they're all in correctly. Stored within a list. Fantastic. So now we're at the stage where we can think about what we're going to do next. We can then say if frame is equal to 0 and start thinking about making things happen. For a start, we can define numString, and we can say that it's equal to an empty list. Splines equal to an empty list. Counter is equal to 0. So we've set up our global variables. They're all set up and ready to go. We can then think about what we're going to do next. Well, for a start, what we actually need to do is work with the splines of our extrudes, because we need to be able to switch these on and off. We can just switch off the letters, but if we do that, we leave the splines behind. I don't want to do that. I would much prefer to switch off the splines and make the whole lot disappear, as you can see here. Now, that does present us with a bit of a hurdle to overcome, as you'll see. Right, let's just continue from here then. So we'll say for letter in range len letters double close. And then we can say splines dot append, and it will be letters square brackets letter dot get children, open close. Now, and we can put a double close on the end of there because of course we've got letters in brackets here. Let's see what happens if we print splines. Right, okay, so we have created a list with our splines in it, but if we print letters and splines as well, if we just clear the window, let's just execute again. Let's have a look. Oh, I've spelled print wrong. Okay, let's just do that and then we can clear the window and have another go. Right, let's see what we've actually got. Now, we did this before and we've got a list containing all of the extrude objects. Okay, and that's fine. But let's just look at the letters we've got within, or the actual splines that we've got within our second list. Now, can you see the obvious problem here? What we've got is a list, but we've got a list containing lists, each of which contain a single object. They're all, if you look at them, all the splines are between square brackets. So we've got a list of lists, in other words. Well, that's a problem because we need this to be able to be broken up into the individual elements here. We want the same. In other words, we want the same as we've got with the letters. We want just a list of splines. We don't want a list of lists, each containing one spline. So we've got a bit of a hurdle that we've got to overcome because it will present us with a problem. So what we've got to do is change the way we're working here. Unfortunately, the fix for this is really simple. So let's just delete this line. What we need to do is say x is equal to, and it will be brackets, letters, brackets letter, dot get children, open double close. So we can say that. In fact, we don't even need the brackets before letters and at the end. We can just do this. Now let's see what we can do from here. We can then say splines dot append, and it will be x brackets 0. So x is going to be constantly changing because of course it will be letters brackets letter. So it's using the for loops. The for loops range is what we're using here. So 0 to 15. So at any given time, x is going to be changing its value. So if we get the spline or the current spline that's actually stored here, then we're going to convert this from a list of lists to a list of objects. So let's just run this now and print splines. Execute, and we can see that we've done it. We've now got a list containing our splines and the brackets around them have been taken away, and that's essential. So that's how you fix that particular problem. So that's got us a bit further, but we've got another hurdle that we need to overcome because we'll just clear this out for a minute. If we select our tag, we can see that we've got one here, which is a list of numbers. However, this is a string. So these are not recognized as numerical values, they're simply characters. And that presents us with a problem because we need them to be numbers, basically. They've got to be seen as index values. And at the moment, they won't be because they're not numbers, they're just characters. So we've got to do another conversion. So how do we go about doing this? We've got to break this this string up into its individual elements. And how are we going to do that? Well, fortunately for us, we can simply say x is equal to 1.split. So we've got a split function or a split method within Python that allows us to do what we need to do here. Now you can just say brackets open and close and it will just break it up into its individual elements. That's no good to us because it will include the commas and also the spaces. We don't want that. So between the brackets, we need to say single quotes, comma, close, single quotes. That's how we need to split this up. So when it sees a comma, it will ignore that particular character. And then it will go to the 1, ignore the comma, go to the 2. That's how this is going to work, okay? I mean, if we wish to, we can add the space to there as well, but we don't actually need to. Just the comma is enough. So moving on, we can simply say for I this time in range, and it will be len brackets x, because x will now be a list in itself, double close. And we can then say num string dot append brackets, and it will be int, because we want to, of course these are integers, the index values are always integers, they're whole numbers, so we've got to say int, because at the moment it will still be treated like a string. It's just a string here. X is basically a string that's been broken up into its individual elements. It's a list of the elements within the string. It is not integers at this particular point. So int here, and then it will be brackets x brackets I double close. And if we then say print brackets num string, we should have a list of numbers. Or do we? Let's have a look, see what we've got. Probably got a problem here. Let's have a look. Num string is not, oh, I see, I've spelt it wrong. I've put num as in num when you're cold. Now see, yep, there we go. So we've got a range of values here between 0 and 15, and these are now integers. And we can check that by simply saying, in fact, we'll do it here, brackets, let's say 2 plus num underscore string brackets, let's say 9. Okay, and let's see what we get. And we get 11. So we've added 2 to 9 to get 11, and that proves that they're now numbers. Fantastic. So that is how you go about doing that particular part of the conversion. The split function is fantastic if you've got a list of values within a string, and then you just simply append your list with the integers of those particular elements. Fantastic. So that's all working really beautifully. Let's move on and do a little bit more work. The next thing we need to do is set Expresso Mechanic up in its initial state, which will be completely switched off. So we want all of the letters to disappear. In order to do that, we'll make some space between our for loop here and x is equal to 1.split, etc. And we'll add another for loop. So we can say for, and it will be spline in range brackets len brackets splines double close. And then we need to actually work with one of our splines here. What we need to do is select our basic tab, and what we're interested in is working with this enabled checkbox. So we need to uncheck all of the checkboxes for our letter splines, and that's what we're going to do. So we've got our for loop in. We now simply need to do the rest of it. What we need to say is splines, and it will be brackets spline, and then we need to drag this in and drop it here, and as per usual it puts it in the wrong place. I do wish it wouldn't do that. We can take the E off and just leave the brackets back to back like that, and then all we've got to do is say is equal to 0, and if we execute this we find everything disappears, and you can see that the checkbox no longer has a tick in it, and all of them will be the same. Fabulous. So we've got it that far. Okay. Moving on from here then, we can think about our next piece of work. And that, in fact, we've got to just, I've just noticed here, these loops are not actually indented correctly. They just need to be there. They must be within if frame is equal to 0. So make sure you do that. Right, let's move on to our next piece of work. So we can then say if counter is less than or equal to 15, because of course we know that we've got 16 values and counter starts at 0. So 0 to 15. Put a colon on the end of there, and then we can move on to our next line. So we can say if frame is greater than 0 and frame modulo, so percentage sign for modulo 5, is equal to 0. So in other words, once our frames have hit the first 5 frames, because we want it to be greater than 0, but we're using a modulo of 5, we want our first letter to come on when we've hit 5 frames, and then every 5 frames after that we want the next letter and the next letter, etc. That's what we're doing here. So our next line will be splines, and it will be brackets num underscore string, num underscore string, and we don't need that bracket, open brackets again, counter, and then it will be double close. And then we want to work with this line again, so this part of this line, we just take that away, paste that in there, and we need to say is equal to 1, and that will allow us to light the letters up in sequence. We can then say counter, if I spell it correctly, plus equals 1, and that will create our letter sequence. So that's all looking good, and we're ready to move on from here. Now we can then say else counter is equal to 0, and then we need this line once again pasted in here. Now this is not really very good, is it? Because you shouldn't really use the same line twice. There's no reason to really do that. So what we need to do in order to avoid doing that is set up a function, and that's what we're going to do next. So if we say def set underscore letters, double close or open close, we can simply copy this, or in fact I'll delete it from here, so Command X, and then paste it here. So we've got it defined as a function, and then down here where we previously had it, we can say set underscore letters open close, and similarly we can say the same thing down here. So we'll just copy that and paste it there. Okay, now all things being fair, let's play the sequence. Oh, what have I got there? I've got an L in there, just take that away. All things being fair, we should be able to play the sequence, and we should get our letters coming onto the screen. So let's see what happens. And there we go, it's working. We'll give ourselves a few more frames. I'll give 1,000 frames. You can do whatever you like, but I'm going to do 1,000, and let's just play this, and it should repeat, and it does. So there we go, we've got it working that far. Now we know that we want to add some radio buttons in here, and we want 5 sequences. So the next port of call for us is to return to our user data and get those things implemented. We've got our Python tag selected, so we can say manage user data. What I will do is command drag to copy this 4 times and then start renaming them. So 1 will be, or our next one after 1 will be 2, 3, 4, and finally 5. I'm not going to worry about the numbers yet. I can do that and come back to you when I've done them. We can then add some more user data here because I need another group, and I can drop that in there, and then I wish to drop all of these into that group. Call this group sequences. Add another group, and we can drop this up here and call it choose sequence, and then add data into here, and this will be our radio buttons. So that needs to be integer radio buttons, and then we need to set those up. So we can say 0 is 1, 1 is 2, 2, 3, 3, 4, and finally 4, 5. And let's go into our details here. We want to set these up as columns, so we want 5 columns. Let's just see the example, and we can see them there. That's what we're going to get, and that's great. That's what we want. Now we can just change the name of our data. Yeah, we can just say sequence in there with a capital S, and that should work fine if we hit OK. So we've got choose sequence, the sequence is there, and we've got our sequences here. Right, now I will set these up, but I'll do it by the power of editing and then come back to you when I've done it. So we'll start with this one. Six, 9, 7, 8, and that completes it. That's the user data set up. Feel free to pause the video if you need to, just so that you can see what these are, or indeed you can just put your own sequences in. You don't have to do exactly what I've done. But that's the user data complete, and we can think about moving on and doing our next step. The first thing we need to think about doing is bringing in the rest of these sequences. So if we bring 2 in here, so 2 is equal to op. That completes that one. Let's get a bit more space so that we're okay. Drag 3 in. Oh dear, dear. Drop 3 in there. 3 is equal to, and it will be op. Bring 4 in. No, not there. What I'll do is drop it somewhere there. Let's just drop 4 in somewhere there. That's better. 4. Oops. 4 is equal to op. And finally 5. Let's just bring that in there. 5 is equal to op. Great, so that gives us all of our sequences within our code, and we can work with them. We also need to drag this in, so let's just bring that in here, and this will be sequence is equal to op. Fantastic, so that brings all of our user data that we need to use within our code. The next thing we need to do is define a second function. So we can say def, and this will be choose underscore sequence. And as its name suggests, this is what we're going to be able to do using this particular function. So we can say if, and we're looking at what we've got here. So we're taking the value from this sequence variable, and of course it is a variable because it works with radio buttons, each of which has an integer value associated with it. So we can say if sequence is equal to 0, x is equal to, and it will be 1 dot split, and it will be brackets, open single quotes, comma, close single quotes. So what we've got down here, so we no longer actually need this. We can remove it now, and we'll be doing it within this function. We can move on. What we'll do is copy all of this and make the necessary changes. So it will be if sequence is equal to 1, x is equal to 2 dot split. And you can see how this is going to continue. So 2, and in here 3. 3, 4. And finally 4, 5. So that's divided the necessary one of these up into its individual elements. We can then say what we've got here. We can remove it from here, and we can paste it here. So for I in range len x, new string dot append the integer, or num string, I beg your pardon, dot append integer x brackets I, and that will set the chosen sequence up in the correct way. The last thing we need to do then is come down to here and add a line to call our function. So we simply need to say choose underscore sequence open close, and that's setting this up at frame 0. Bit more work to do before we complete it altogether, but that completes this particular step and we can move on from here. Before we move on, let's just prove that this is actually working. We knew that we had one working and it still does. That's doing what it should be doing. Let's just try 2, and there we go. That's doing exactly what it should be doing. 3. So are we going to get 3 working? Let's have a look. Let's just see if we can get 3. Yeah, it does work, but you've got to go back to 0. Okay, that's working fine. Might as well do the other 2. Yeah, that works as it should. That's great. And finally 5. Let's see what we've got there. Yeah, all behaving exactly as they should. One thing you can see though, and this is where we need to do some more work, is that it's not really pleasing on the eye when all of the letters have come in and it does the repeat. It's too quick. And what we need is a delay. And that's what we're going to create next. And in order to create that delay, we're actually going to be using a monoflop and range mapper. We're going to be using it in a way that we've never used it before, simply to create a pause within our animation. So what we can do is come up to the top here and just add another global variable, which will be start time. So start underscore time. Okay. Now, start time will also need to be defined at 0. So we'll need to say start underscore time is equal to 0 in there. That's got us a little bit further. And now we can think about where we're going next. What we need to do is just come up above this else here. And we'll place another else above it. And then we can select all of these lines and just indent them in, because we still need this, and in fact we need a few more things within this else down here. But we can now think about where we're going from here. We can say if start underscore time is less than 1, and we can look at where we're going from here. We can then say start underscore time is equal to, and it will be frame. So frame in there. Moving on from here, we need to define duration, which is just a local variable. So duration will be equal to, and it will be frame minus start time. You've seen me do this a number of times. We can then say if duration is less than, and I'm going to say 30. So I want to create a 1 second pause after all of the letters of the words are on screen. So if duration is less than 30, then it will be range underscore mapper is equal to c4d dot utils dot range map brackets, and it will simply be duration comma 0 comma 30 comma 0 comma 30. So the input and output range are both exactly the same, and then all we need to say is comma true, and we can leave it at that, and that range mapper will create the pause that we require. So this is a useful way to use the monoflop and range mapper code. If you ever need to put a pause in your imagination, in your animation, this is the way to do it. Okay, fantastic. Let's work with this second else. So once the monoflop and range mapper have done their job, our pause will have lasted for 30 frames, and we can jump to this else and reset everything. The first thing that we need to do is say num underscore string dot clear, because once this sequence has been completed, we're then going to be moving on to use another sequence. So we've got to clear the num string out to accommodate the new sequence. So that's got to be done. The counter does need to be set to 0. We certainly need to move on from here and say start time is equal to 0, because that's got to be reset. Set letters is fine, and then we finally need to say choose underscore sequence, and that is the code complete. Let's give it a try and see if it all works and does what it needs to do. So let's run the timeline. Right, we've got an issue with duration. Let's have a look. Duration is not defined. Where are we? Let's have a look. Duration. Oh, I see. I spelt it wrong. Put an A in there. That should be fine. Let's go back and see what happens. That all comes on. We pause, and then it repeats. So everything is working so far. Let's let this come on. If we just select 2 now, and that's working. There you go. Let's select 3. Yep, that's working. 4. That's working. 5. And that's working. That's how you do it. That's how you make this work. And of course, as I say, these are all fully animatable, so you can set it up in any sequence that you wish, or any order of sequences that you wish. As I say, these are open to be changed. Do whatever you like with them. You could even add more sequences and just bring it in, bring the user data in, bring it into here. There's so much you can do with this. It's very, very versatile. It's probably even possible to actually set this up as a Python effector. You should be able to set this up and work with clones. But I'll leave that to you to have a think about. I mean, of course, they don't have to be letters. I mean, for a start, you could just put cubes in here, or anything you like, and just switch those on and off. It could be jigsaw puzzle pieces or something, and you could make that magically appear. But that, it really is entirely up to you. Just use your imagination and see what you can come up with. But it's quite a versatile little piece of code that we've got here. And it's something that you can have a really good play around with. But anyway, that is how you go about creating a letter sequencer using the Python tag. And that brings us to the end of this tutorial, because I've shown you what I wanted you to see, and it all works perfectly well, as you can see. So, as always, I really hope you've enjoyed doing this tutorial and that it's given you some ideas for a few things that you may be able to incorporate within your own projects. And if you have enjoyed the video, please give it a like, and if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, and of course, ring the bell. And wherever you happen to be on social media, please do share this video, because all this good stuff really does help keep the channel moving in the right direction. But anyway, that just about brings the curtain down on this one, so I'll see you very soon on the next tutorial.